Welcome to the Deep Dive. We plunge into some pretty complex stuff here to bring you the essential insights.
That's the idea.
And today, we're heading into, well, arguably one of the most demanding environments in aviation. High mountain operation.
Absolutely. It's not just flying. It really tests everything a pilot knows.
Yeah.
Skills, knowledge, even gut feeling sometimes.
A real crucible.
Yeah.
And our guide for this.
We're drawing heavily from the Commercial Pilot's Handbook, specifically Chapter-18 by Captain Ashutosh Chopra. He calls mountain flying a treacherous cocktail.
A treacherous cocktail. I like that. Captures the mix of variables, right?
Perfectly. It's where the sort of art and science of flying really collide head on.
So our mission today is to, untack that cocktail. We want to pull out the critical insights, understand the unique challenges, the stringent requirements, basically give you a shortcut to what well-informed really means in this high-stakes game.
And you might be surprised by some of the intricate procedures and just wild weather phenomena involved.
I bet. Let's get into it. So pre-flight planning, we know it's always important, but for mountain flights, Captain Chopra says it's like uniquely critical, especially thinking about engine failure or decompression way up high over mountains.
That's right. And it's interesting, the decompression side of things, the rules are actually much stricter than even for engine failure in some ways.
Oh, really? Why is that? What's driving that urgency?
It boils down to the emergency oxygen for passengers. It's
Yeah.
limited. So if you have a decompression, the clock starts ticking immediately. You have to get the aircraft below 14,000 feet. Within about 12 to 30 minutes.
12 to 30 minutes,
Yeah, depends on the specific oxygen system, but it's a very tight window.
Yeah.
And it doesn't stop there. Even once you're below 14,000, you've only got a maximum of 30 minutes between 14,000 and 10,000 feet.
Okay.
After that, you absolutely must be below 10,000 feet. So this timeline, it forces pilots to have that emergency descent plan just locked in, memorized, visualized, ready to go.
No fumbling for the checklist then.
Absolutely not.
Which brings us to Grid More A. Minimum off-route altitude. How does that fit into this race against time?
Grid More RA. Think of it as this invisible safety net, a non-negotiable floor altitude. It guarantees 2,000 feet of clearance above any terrain or obstacle, specifically when terrain is above 5,000 feet.
2,000 feet, okay.
And on the charts, if that Amore is above 14,000 feet, it's colored magenta, a clear visual warning.
Right.
The critical rule here is that your flight path, even if you lose an engine, your net flight path altitude must stay above that grid Amore for the route you've planned.
Okay, so even on one engine, you have to clear it.
Correct. And here's a key point. Sometimes the terrain ahead, the way it spreads out or climbs, might mean you just can't descend straight ahead quickly enough.
Uh-huh.
That's when you need an escape path. A pre-planned turn left or right into lower terrain or clear air. That escape path becomes absolutely vital. You're not just going down, you might be going down and turning sharply.
Can you walk us through an example like the one Captain Chopra gives? Put us in the cockpit.
Sure. Imagine you're cruising at, say, flight level 37,000 feet. Suddenly, decompression. Bang. First, immediate rapid descent. You need to get down to, in his example, 25,000 feet.
Okay.
Now, that 25,000 feet is the grid or RA for that area, and the highest peaks underneath are maybe 23,000 feet, so you're already quite close.
Right.
Then, within that first 12-minute oxygen window, you must get down below 14,000 feet if the terrain right in front of you is still too high.
That's the escape path moment.
Exactly. You execute that pre-planned turn into the clear. Then, after hitting 14,000, you have that next 30-minute window to descend further below 10,000 feet. It's a very choreographed, very urgent sequence.
Choreographed is the right word. It makes that pre-flight briefing sound less like paperwork and more like, well, rehearsing for a life or death performance.
Yeah.
What goes into that specific briefing?
It's incredibly detailed. It has to cover potential engine failure scenarios, the decompression procedures we just discussed, and those exact escape paths, where to turn, what altitude to maintain. But here's the kicker. Pilots don't just brief it once before the flight. They are required to pull out that specific briefing material and review it again about 10 minutes before they actually enter the designated mountainous segment of the route.
10 minutes before, so it's fresh in their minds.
Exactly. Ensures the whole crew is synced up, alert, mentally prepped for the specific challenges right ahead of them. No complacency allowed.
Okay, that planning is intense.
Yeah.
Now let's talk weather. We all know weather's tricky, but mountains, it sounds like they play by different rules, like they make their own weather.
That's a great way to put it. Over flat terrain, you mostly deal with larger weather systems moving through. But mountains, they actively shape and, yes, create localized weather because of their sheer size and elevation changes.
How so?
Well, they dramatically affect temperature, especially vertically, and they twist and channel wind flow in ways you just don't see over plains. This means understanding the micro-level meteorology isn't just nice to have, it's fundamental for safety.
You're not just dealing with the big picture forecast then?
Not at all. You're dealing with the mountain's specific, sometimes very localized moods.
Okay, give us some examples of these mountain moods. What kind of localized effects are we talking about?
All right. Well, one common one is radiation fog. It can form deep in valleys, especially overnight, and just sit there, thick as anything, sometimes taking hours to burn off after sunrise.
Trapped in the valley.
Exactly. Then you have inversion layers. These can create these weird, distinct bands of haze at certain altitudes. The visibility at the airport surface might be perfectly fine, legally okay to land, but as you descend through that inversion layer on approach, suddenly the runway just vanishes in the haze. Makes seeing the runway environment incredibly difficult, even if technically legal.
Wow, okay. And wind, I imagine that's a whole different beast in the mountains.
Oh, absolutely. Mountains act like funnels and barriers. You get katabatic winds. This is cold, dense air, essentially sliding downhill, rushing down slopes. They can reach speeds close to 60 knots.
60 knots, just from air sliding downhill.
Yeah, like an invisible river of cold air. Then there's the Venturi effect. Squeeze wind between two ridges or through a narrow valley pass, and it speeds up dramatically, like putting your thumb over a hose pipe.
Right.
This is super dangerous on final approach when the aircraft is configured for landing, flaps out, gear down, lots of drag. You're slow, trying to land, and suddenly get hit by a blast of accelerated wind.
Yeah, that sounds unstable.
Very. And you can get this effect even above the ridgetops, too. Similar things happen with foehn winds, which are typically warm, dry winds that rush down the leeward side of mountains due to pressure differences. High speeds, often gusty.
You also mentioned mountain waves. That just sounds turbulent.
It is, extremely. Mountain waves happen when you have strong winds, say over 20, 30 knots, hitting a mountain ridge at roughly a right angle, like 90 degrees.
Okay.
This sets up these oscillations in the airflow, creating waves, much like water flowing over a rock. These waves can generate severe, even extreme turbulence.
How do pilots even spot this?
Sometimes you get visual clues. Lenticular clouds, these smooth, lens-shaped clouds that look stationary, are a classic sign of wave activity. But beware, sometimes cap clouds can form right over the peaks, masking the mountaintops themselves.
Hiding the hazard.
Exactly. And the most dangerous part, the rotors. These are areas of intense, rolling turbulence that can form underneath the wave crests, often extending for many, many miles downwind from the ridge. And crucially, these rotors can exist in perfectly clear air, no clouds, nothing to see, just violent turbulence.
That's genuinely scary. Invisible turbulence miles away from the mountain.
It requires real respect for the terrain and the conditions.
And what about simple up and down drafts? Can they really overpower a plane?
They certainly can, especially at higher altitudes where engine performance is already reduced. On the windward side, facing the wind, you get strong updrafts. On the leeward side, downwind, powerful downdrafts. A strong downdraft can easily exceed an aircraft's climb capability, especially if it's heavy or operating in high temperatures. It could literally push the aircraft down towards the terrain.
And the opposite effect, the updrafts.
That's orographic lift, the air being forced upwards by the mountain slope. This often leads to the formation of, as the book calls them, troublesome CB clouds, cumulonimbus, thunderstorms, basically.
Right over the mountains.
Yes. These can obviously block approach paths, but they also generate their own violent eddies and turbulence near the terrain. It all just layers up.
Okay, so you're battling wind, potential fog, hidden turbulence, powerful drafts. And you still have to worry about simply not hitting the mountains themselves. Terrain separation must be incredibly mentally taxing.
It is hugely demanding. Pilots use everything they have, paper charts, electronic charts on tablets or EFBs, and the terrain database in the flight management computer, the FMC.
Right, the FMC shows terrain.
It does, and it's great for situational awareness, for getting the big picture. But, and this is a critical point from the handbook, you absolutely cannot use the FMC's terrain display for actual maneuvering or to guarantee separation. It's a supplementary tool, not a primary navigation instrument for avoiding terrain.
So it's just an advisory display?
Pretty much. You need to rely on published routes, procedures, and altitudes. And even standard IFR routes, which are designed for safety, might have surprisingly tight margins over high terrain, especially if bad weather comes into play.
That brings up altimeters again. You mentioned flight levels earlier, based on pressure. Why don't they guarantee consistent separation from the ground?
Because a flight level is a surface of constant pressure, not constant height above the ground. Think about it if the atmospheric pressure changes across an area, which it often does. Flying a constant pressure level means your actual height above the ground will vary.
Ah, okay. So how do pilots ensure they do have enough clearance?
The key is using the right altimeter setting. Often they'll switch to what's called an area QNH. This is the lowest forecast atmospheric pressure setting for the whole region they're flying through.
Lowest? Why lowest?
Because using the lowest pressure setting makes your altimeter read slightly lower than your actual altitude. It builds in an extra margin of safety. You think you're lower, so you fly higher relative to the terrain.
Clever. Like a built-in buffer.
Exactly. Or they'll get the very latest QNH directly from the destination airfield and be absolutely clear about the exact point where they switch over from the standard pressure setting used at high altitudes to the local QNH. This is vital for both terrain clearance and staying separated from other traffic.
What about QFE? I've heard of that. Setting the altimeter to read 0 on the ground.
QFE exists, yeah. It measures height above the airfield itself. But Captain Chopra notes it's generally best avoided in commercial ops unless a specific procedure demands it. Most pilots aren't as familiar with it day to day, and some aircraft systems might have limitations. Sticking to QNH is usually standard practice.
And there's a specific way they announce setting changes to catch errors.
Yes, a simple but effective technique. When changing the altimeter setting, they'll often prefix or suffix it in their radio call or cross-check. So instead of just saying 1013, they might say QNH 1013 set, or setting 1013.
Makes it clear.
It does. Provides an immediate audio cross-check for the other pilot, and also clearly signals to air traffic control and other aircraft exactly what reference they're using. Helps catch mistakes quickly. And one more thing on altimeters.
Yeah.
Cold temperatures. Air contracts when it's cold, so your altimeter will actually read higher than your true altitude. You're lower than you think you are.
Oh, that's dangerous near mountains.
Extremely. So pilots have to apply a specific cold weather altitude correction, especially during descent, starting with the minimum safe altitude, or MSA. And interestingly, around mountainous airports, there might be several different MSAs depending on which direction you're approaching from because the terrain varies so much.
So many layers to consider. Okay, let's say you're committed. You're on the approach in the mountains. It sounds like there's not much wiggle room if things go wrong.
That's spot on. Once you commit to an approach path in tight terrain, there's often absolutely zero flexibility to just, nip around something.
Well,
if you have to discontinue the approach.
It's the full missed approach procedure.
Almost always. A predefined, published procedure designed to climb you safely away from terrain and other traffic. And maneuvering itself close to terrain at high altitude presents its own unique challenges.
How so?
Well, here's a really critical concept. An aircraft's ability to turn, its G-loading capability, depends on its indicated airspeed, IAS, what the gauge shows. But the actual radius of the turn, how much space it covers over the ground, depends on its true airspeed, TAS.
And TAS is higher at altitude.
Much higher. For the same IAS, your TAS increases significantly as you climb into thinner air. So your turn radius gets much wider than you might intuitively expect based on your indicated speed.
So your gut feeling about how tightly you can turn could be wrong.
Dangerously wrong. Combine that wider turn radius with the fact that engine performance, and therefore climb rate, is significantly reduced at high altitude. And you can see how trying to visually maneuver or turn away from terrain, especially if the aircraft is heavy or it's hotter than standard temperature, could quickly lead to disaster. You simply might not be able to outclimb or outturn the rising terrain.
Captain Chopra has an example of this too, doesn't he? The go-around near a cloud.
Yes, a very stark one.
Yeah.
A pilot initiates a go-around near a large cumulonimbus cloud. They visually judge the turn needed based on their IAS, say 200 knots, but because they're at altitude, their TAS is actually much higher, maybe 235 knots.
Okay.
That higher TAS means the actual turn radius is far larger than they visually estimated. They end up much closer to terrain than they ever intended, and Chopra adds the chilling line. Such errors have been made before.
A sobering thought. Okay, so landing. What other specific challenges arise during the final approach and landing phase? You mentioned icing earlier.
Right. Icing conditions in mountainous areas tend to be more severe and can last longer. So if you have to enter a holding pattern while waiting to approach, icing becomes a major concern.
And the approaches themselves, they can be complex.
It's very complex, especially the newer RNP required navigation performance approaches. These often involve intricate, winding paths with multiple turn points designed to snake through valleys.
Sounds like high workload.
Extremely high workload, particularly during descent when you're also configuring the aircraft for landing, flaps, gear. This is where the role of the pilot monitoring the pilot not flying becomes absolutely critical, cross-checking everything.
And some airfields are just inherently difficult. Steep approaches.
Yes, high-altitude airfields often have only one usable approach direction due to terrain, and sometimes the approach path itself has to be much steeper than normal.
So you're coming down faster.
You have a steeper descent angle. This means pilots absolutely must get into their landing configuration high drag with flaps and gear down well ahead of time to manage their speed effectively. If you add a tailwind into that mix, and you haven't configured early, you might find it impossible to slow down enough to land safely. You'll just float down the runway.
Which underscores the importance of deciding not to even start the approach sometimes.
Absolutely crucial. If the weather's bad, winds are unfavorable, or conditions just don't look right, the correct decision is often to hold clear of the mountains or divert elsewhere. Don't press on into a marginal situation. Even the wind can trick you terrain, can cause strong localized tailwinds on final approach, even if ATC reports a headwind right over the runway surface. You need to be ready to make a very timely go-around decision.
And that go-around, it sounds like the ultimate challenge.
It really is. Imagine high altitude, already reduced performance, possibly bad weather, maybe at night, maybe even with an engine failure. Initiating a go-around in mountainous terrain is exceptionally difficult and demands peak performance.
Which explains why some airports have restrictions.
Precisely. That's why some mountain airfields are restricted to day VFR-only visual conditions during daylight. Others might have very strict crosswind limits or only allow landings and takeoffs in one direction, regardless of the wind.
And certain equipment becomes absolutely essential.
Non-negotiable. Your radio altimeter, measuring height directly below the aircraft, your EGPWS, Enhanced Ground Proximity Warning System, your weather radar, all must be fully serviceable. And if the aircraft has a vertical situation display, VSD, which graphically shows the terrain profile ahead, using it effectively is key. These aren't nice to haves, they're lifelines.
So we've broken down planning, weather, terrain, maneuvering. But it's the combination, that treacherous cocktail that Captain Chopra emphasizes, when everything stacks up: mountains, heat, bad weather, night.
That's when the margins just shrink dramatically. The biggest factor often becomes density altitude. Remember, that's pressure altitude corrected for temperature. Hotter air is thinner air.
Right, like flying higher than you actually are.
Exactly. And thinner air means less lift from the wings and less power from the engines. Aerodynamic performance suffers. Engine performance suffers, everything becomes harder, and your safety margins, which might already be tight, just evaporate.
And the worst case scenario for this?
Probably an engine failure right after takeoff from a high altitude mountain airfield on a hot day. You're at your heaviest weight, performance is already degraded by density altitude, and now you're on one engine, needing to climb and maneuver immediately to avoid terrain.
There's just no room for hesitation.
None whatsoever. Which brings us back to the planning and preparation. Pilots operating in these environments must have briefed for these scenarios, visualized the escape routes, and essentially memorized the emergency procedures. There is simply no time to pull out a manual when things go wrong that quickly.
It has to be instinctive.
It has to be. It's the absolute peak of preparedness and skill. Going through all this, it really highlights how mountain flying isn't just a set of procedures. It's this continuous process of critical thinking, making layered decisions, adapting constantly to an environment that's always changing. Every single detail, every observation, it all matters so much. The sheer depth of knowledge and preparation is, well, it's astounding.
It really is. So what does this all mean for us listening to this? I mean, this deep dive is peeled back the layers on this incredibly specialized high-stakes world. It shows the immense knowledge, the intense training, the constant vigilance that's required. And it makes you think, doesn't it?
Huh.
What other things in our daily lives, systems we rely on, activities that seem totally routine, what else is built on these kind of incredibly complex, often completely unseen levels of preparation and real-time adaptation? What hidden depths, what intricate dances of variables exist all around us that we just rarely ever consider? Makes you wonder what other treacherous cocktails are being expertly managed just at a site.